The temperature gauge was not a gauge at all. It was a digital tombstone. It read, -58.7 degrees Celsius. Outside the thin aluminum skin of the Cessna, the wind was a screaming banshee. Inside, Captain Elias Volkov, the stone, to his former comrades, was focused on the map, not the cold. His plane, a stripped-down single-engine workhorse, was nothing more than a metal speck suspended between the emptiness of the Siberian sky and the emptiness of the Siberian ground. They were flying a routine aerial survey over the remote Viliui River basin, a place where maps were more suggestion than fact, and the only rule was the cold. Elias was the observer. Dmitri, his co-pilot and friend, was wrestling the controls. Elias, we're losing the port engine. I need to feather the prop, but the ice, it's a living thing out here, brother. Don't baby it, Dmitri. She's tough. Give me a vector. Get us to the tree line. Elias didn't move. His hands were resting loosely on his thighs, his posture upright and firm. Years in the Special Reconnaissance Brigade had conditioned him to a state of stillness that looked like calm, but was, in fact, pure, predatory focus. He knew what others didn't, that the greatest enemy in a crisis is always the self. But this was different. This wasn't a firefight. This was the North. We've lost it. Ice contamination. Mayday, mayday. We're going down. The roar of the wind suddenly became the roar of tearing metal. The horizon exploded into a white blur as the plane tilted sideways, spiraling toward the ancient, unforgiving taiga forest. Elias felt the impact not as a single blow, but as a series of shattering concussions. The smell of aviation fuel, hot oil, and pine needles filled the cramped cockpit. Then silence. A ringing, absolute silence that was broken only by the hiss of cooling metal and the low, unrelenting moan of the wind. Dmitri? No answer. Elias unclipped his harness. His body was a map of dull, screaming pain. He reached out and felt for Dmitri. His friend's head was slumped forward against the yoke. He felt for a pulse. Nothing. In a single, gut-wrenching moment, the mission changed. It was no longer a reconnaissance flight. It was an extraction. Elias was now completely alone. The temperature gauge in the shattered instrument panel now simply read. He shoved open the mangled cockpit door. The cold hit him not as a chill but as a physical, solid force, stealing the breath from his lungs. It was -60 degrees Celsius. Cold enough to freeze exposed skin in under 60 seconds. Cold enough to turn blood into sludge. He was lost in Siberia. And the first hour was the only thing that mattered. Elias didn't panic. Panic was a luxury he had surgically removed from his personality. He worked on pure protocol. He surveyed the wreckage. The Cessna was split open like a discarded aluminum can. The tail section, where the emergency beacon would have been, was gone. His radio was a mess of sparking wires. His compass was shattered. He was effectively deaf, blind, and invisible. He salvaged what he could. Dimitri's emergency pack, small but better than nothing. A half-full canteen of kerosene. A battered military-grade knife, his old friend. The wreckage's fire extinguisher, now empty, but the canister was a resource. He stripped the protective blanket from Dimitri's seat and covered his friend's body. A promise whispered into the wind. I won't leave you here, brother. Not like this. The reality of his situation was a crushing weight. He was 400 kilometers from the nearest settlement, a mining outpost that was likely buried under snow. He had no communication. He had no warmth. He had less than 24 hours before his core temperature dropped to the point of no return. He needed to create a microclimate, a pocket of air where the temperature could be raised by even 10 degrees. He crawled toward a dense stand of young fir trees. The snow here was 4 feet deep, light and powdery, terrible insulation. He began to dig, not with his hands but with the wreckage of a wing flap he'd pried loose. His movements were precise, efficient, draining. Every dig, every movement was a negotiation with the cold. The cold lies to you. It whispers promises of sleep. It tells you to rest. It promises peace. I remembered Lena, my wife. Her eyes, the color of warm amber. Elias, you look at everything like it's a threat, she'd said. Can't you just see a tree? I see a threat, Lena. I see a resource. The tree is not a tree. It's fuel. It's structure. The bark on the south side is thinner, the knots are softer. The pine needles hold air, they are bedding. They are everything. Elias finished digging the pit, about 2 meters long, a tight fit. He packed the snow walls tight, using the wind-battered flap as a roof. He covered the floor with pine boughs. It was small, but it was done. This was the true test. Fire was not just heat. It was sanity, sterilization, and a spiritual weapon against the crushing silence. He reached into his pack for his ferrocerium rod, the spark of God. But he knew a spark was useless without tinder. In the high taiga, everything was frozen solid. The wet sap, the snow, the air itself. He pulled out a piece of birch bark from his pocket, the one dry piece he had peeled from the underside of a fallen log before the plane took off. Foresight. The difference between a man who lives and a man who dies. He shaved fine curls from the bark with his knife. He bundled the curls into a bird's nest of fibers, holding it close to his chest to warm it with his body heat, transferring life to the dead wood. He struck the ferro rod. A violent cascade of white-hot sparks erupted, showering the tinder nest. Nothing. He struck it again harder. The sparks hit the wood. He could see a tiny, fragile smoke tendril rising from the nest. It was working. He cupped the nest, holding his breath, leaning in. He began to blow, a slow, gentle, controlled exhalation. The same breath control he'd used to steady his rifle in a zero-visibility snowstorm on a past mission. A small, perfect flame erupted. Red. The color of life against the white, endless death. Elias didn't cheer. He didn't even smile. He simply fed the flame, nursing it with thin, dry pine twigs. The fire was alive. And so, for the moment, was Elias Volkov. He had survived the first hour. Now came the true challenge, surviving the next week. He had to move. He had to find the Vilui River and follow it south. He was an arrowhead in the heart of the north. And the north was about to try and break him. Elias sits by the fire. The pain in his legs/ribs is too much to ignore. He looks at his old friend Knife. A defining training exercise/mission 10 years ago in the Caucasus Mountains, deep winter. The scenario: lone operative, no food, hunted by Opfer, opposing force, acting as a wolf pack. Elias nearly dies of exhaustion/starvation. His instructor, Major Kuznetsov, finds him and gives him the wolf's lesson. The wolf does not fear the cold is simply what is. Survival is not a fight against the environment, but a total, immediate acceptance of it. Kuznetsov forces Elias to strip down in the ice to conquer his fear of the cold. Elias survives the exercise, earning his codename, the Stone. This memory gives him the mental fortitude to endure his injuries now. Elias must cross the Vilui River. It looks frozen, but he knows the undercurrents will have created thin ice spots. It is his most dangerous hurdle. He uses his knowledge to read the ice, moving with practiced, silent steps, testing every inch. He sees the real wolves now, a pack of 4, stalking him from the tree line. The antagonist is no longer just the cold, but a living, hungry threat. The ice cracks. Elias falls partially in the water. The shock of the sub-zero water is devastating. He pulls himself out with raw will, knowing the wolves will close the distance. He must use his wet clothes to his advantage by using them as a brief, hard layer of ice armor. Or Elias uses a controlled burn, a fire he prepared earlier, to create a barrier, distracting the wolves long enough to create distance. Exhausted, hallucinating, he finally spots a column of smoke on the horizon. He has reached the mining outpost. He stumbles in, the miners are shocked. He has survived -60°C for 3 days. Elias recovers in a hospital. He looks at a photo of Lena. The cold may have tried to lie to him, but his promise to her, his training, and his will to survive won. The moral: the greatest strength is the ability to accept the impossible. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded what true endurance looks like. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of human will versus the impossible.